I still remember the sound of the tape stretching across the last cardboard box, sealing it shut with a finality that echoed in my mind. My entire life was packed into 8 boxes and 2 suitcases. I looked around my now empty apartment, the place that had been my home for the past 3 years, and felt a bittersweet pang. I was leaving my city, my friends, and my job to start a new life in Nathan's city. After 3 years of long distance, this move felt like the logical next step, a way to prove our love could survive the realities of day-to-day life. "It's going to be amazing," Nathan had said during one of our many late-night phone calls. Finally, no more airports, no more planning visits months in advance. Just us. I had replayed those words in my head countless times, letting them drown out the doubts that crept in when I thought about everything I was giving up. The first few weeks in the new city felt like a whirlwind romance all over again. Nathan took time off work to help me settle in. We spent days exploring the neighborhoods, trying new coffee shops, and decorating our apartment. It wasn't fancy, just a modest 1-bedroom with mismatched furniture, but it was ours. One night, as we sprawled on the living room floor surrounded by takeout containers and half-assembled IKEA furniture, I looked at him and thought, "This is what I've been waiting for." "This place already feels like home," I said, smiling. "It's because you're here," he replied, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. As Nathan returned to work, our days started to settle into a routine. He'd leave early in the morning, dressed sharply in his suit, while I stayed behind, unpacking the last of the boxes and figuring out my next steps. At first, I didn't mind the solitude. It gave me time to explore the city on my own. I found a quaint bookstore nearby, started running in the park, and even joined a yoga class. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the weight of being alone. The newness of the city no longer felt exciting, it felt isolating. Nathan's job had always been demanding, but now, I was seeing just how much of his time and energy it consumed. Our evenings together became shorter and quieter. He'd come home exhausted, often retreating to his laptop to finish work or catch up on emails. I tried to be understanding. It was important work, after all, but I couldn't help feeling like I was slipping into the background. One night, I tried to talk to him about it. "You've been so busy lately. Do you think we could plan a date night this weekend?" He looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "Of course. Things are just hectic right now, but I'll make time." His words were reassuring, but his tone felt distant. As Nathan became more absorbed in work, I found myself missing the life I'd left behind. I missed the familiarity of my old city, the friends who were just a text away, the job that gave me purpose, and the sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd taken for granted. Here, I felt like an outsider. I didn't know the unspoken rules of this city, the best places to eat, or how to find my footing in a place where everyone seemed to have their own established lives. Determined not to wallow in loneliness, I made an effort to connect with people. I struck up conversations at yoga class, joined a book club, and even attended a networking event. But making friends as an adult isn't easy. Most people were polite but already had their own circles. When I told Nathan about my struggles, he tried to be supportive. "You'll find your people," he said. "It just takes time." I nodded, but his reassurance felt hollow. Time was what I had too much of, and yet it felt like it wasn't moving at all. I started noticing little changes in Nathan that I couldn't ignore. He wasn't as quick to share details about his day, often brushing off my questions with vague answers like, "It was fine," or "just the usual." Our once-long conversations about hopes and dreams now felt like logistical updates, grocery lists and utility bills. I began to wonder if this was normal. Maybe this was just what relationships looked like after the honeymoon phase. One evening, I planned a nice dinner to surprise Nathan. I spent hours cooking his favorite meal, setting the table with candles and flowers. When he walked in, his expression was unreadable. "What's all this?" he asked. "I thought we could do something special," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Thanks, babe. This looks great. The evening was pleasant enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Desperate for perspective, I called my best friend, Rachel, one afternoon. Is this normal? I asked, pacing the apartment. He's just different. Quieter. Less present. Rachel hesitated. It could be the stress of the move or his job, she said. But you shouldn't ignore how you're feeling. Have you talked to him about it? Not really, I admitted. I don't want to seem needy. Needy? Elena, you moved your whole life for him. You're allowed to have feelings. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. One night, as I sat alone in the apartment, the quiet felt suffocating. The city lights outside the window blurred as I stared at them, lost in thought. This was supposed to be the beginning of something wonderful. So why did it feel like something was slipping away? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't ignore the changes anymore. Nathan's return to work marked the slow unraveling of the life I thought we'd have together. Mornings were rushed and quiet. He'd kiss me on the forehead before heading out the door, leaving me to face long days of solitude. Evenings were spent with him hunched over his laptop, his responses to my attempts at conversation little more than monosyllabic answers. At first, I told myself this was temporary, that once he settled into a rhythm at work, we'd find our groove again. But as weeks turned into months, the distance between us grew. One afternoon, Rachel called to check in. "How's city life treating you?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "It's different," I said finally. "Nathan's been really busy with work, and I'm still trying to find my footing here." "Are you happy?" she asked bluntly. Her question caught me off guard. Was I happy? I didn't know. "I think we're just adjusting," I said, more to convince myself than her. "Well, don't forget that this move was supposed to be about both of you," Rachel said. "You deserve to feel at home, too." Her words lingered long after the call ended. The cracks in our relationship became more visible with time. Nathan's job consumed him, leaving little room for anything else. When he wasn't working late, he was too tired to engage in meaningful conversation or spend quality time together. One evening, I suggested a weekend getaway to rekindle our connection. "We could go hiking, maybe stay at that cabin we talked about," I said, trying to sound hopeful. He sighed, not even looking up from his laptop. "I don't think I can take time off right now." His dismissal stung, but I swallowed my frustration, unsure how to voice what I was feeling. The loneliness I felt in the city was sharper than I'd expected. Back home, I'd had a network of friends, a job I loved, and a sense of belonging. Here, everything felt foreign and unfamiliar. I spent hours wandering the city, trying to find places that felt like mine. I joined clubs, attended events, and made small talk with strangers, but nothing seemed to fill the void. Coming home to an empty apartment, or worse, Nathan's distracted presence, only deepened my sense of isolation. One night, I tried to talk to Nathan about how I was feeling. "I miss us," I said quietly, as we sat on the couch. "It feels like we're drifting." He glanced at me, his brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, Elena. Work's been intense lately. I didn't realize you were feeling this way." "It's not just work," I said, summoning the courage to continue. "You're distant. I feel like I barely know what's going on in your life anymore." Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not trying to shut you out. I guess I just get in my own head sometimes." Though his words were meant to reassure me, they felt like a deflection. The next day, I called Maya, a new friend I'd met in my yoga class. "He says he's just busy, but it feels like there's more to it," I said, pacing the apartment. "It's like he's putting up walls, and I don't know how to get through to him." Maya listened thoughtfully before responding. "Maybe it's not about you," she said. "Sometimes people retreat when they're stressed." But that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of the relationship alone. Her perspective gave me pause. Was I trying too hard to fix something that Nathan wasn't ready to address? Determined to reconnect, I planned a surprise date night, his favorite dinner, followed by a movie he'd been wanting to see. When he walked through the door, I greeted him with a smile. "I thought we could do something fun tonight," I said. Nathan looked tired, his shoulders slumping. "Elena, I appreciate it, but I'm exhausted. Can we just eat and call it a night?" I forced a smile, nodding. "Of course." As we ate in silence, I couldn't help but wonder if I was fighting for something he no longer cared about. The turning point came one weekend and Nathan canceled plans at the last minute to finish a work project. "It's just one weekend," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's not just one weekend," I snapped, the frustration bubbling over. "It's every weekend. It's every night. You're here, but you're not here." Nathan stared at me, taken aback. "I'm doing this for us, Elena. So we can have a good life." "What's the point of a good life if we're not in it together?" I said, my voice trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. After that argument, I began questioning everything about our relationship. Had we always been this disconnected, and I just hadn't noticed? Or was the move the catalyst for something that had been building all along? More than anything, I wondered if this was something we could fix, or if we'd reached the beginning of the end. Despite the tension between us, I wasn't ready to give up. I still loved Nathan, and I believed that beneath the stress and distance, he loved me too. But love alone wasn't enough. We needed to make a choice, either fight for what we had or let it slip away. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent vow to fight for us. I just hoped Nathan would do the same. After weeks of feeling stuck in a cycle of frustration and loneliness, I decided that if I wanted things to change, I had to be the one to start. Waiting for Nathan to notice how unhappy I was clearly wasn't working. I sat down with a notebook and began listing all the things I missed about our relationship: late-night conversations, spontaneous adventures, even the way he used to laugh at my terrible jokes. The list felt bittersweet, but it gave me clarity. I wasn't ready to let go of those moments. I approached Nathan with a plan. "Let's take a day off this weekend," I suggested. "No work, no distractions. Just us." He hesitated, glancing at his laptop. "I've got a lot to catch up on." "Please, Nathan," I said, my voice softer. "We need this." Something in my tone must have struck a chord because he finally nodded. "Okay. Let's do it." It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory. That Saturday, we spent the day exploring a nearby hiking trail. At first, the silence between us felt heavy, but as the hours passed, we began to talk, really talk. Nathan told me about the pressure he'd been feeling at work, the constant deadlines, and his fear of not measuring up. "I didn't want to burden you with it," he admitted. "I thought I could handle it on my own." I reached for his hand. "You don't have to handle everything alone. That's why I'm here." By the end of the day, I felt a glimmer of hope. We weren't back to where we used to be, but we were moving in the right direction. While I was focused on reconnecting with Nathan, I also realized I needed to find fulfillment outside of our relationship. I signed up for a photography class I'd been eyeing for weeks, dusting off the camera I hadn't touched in years. The first class was intimidating. I was surrounded by people who seemed far more skilled than I was, but as I snapped photos of the city skyline, I felt a spark of excitement. It was the first time in a long time that I'd done something just for myself. Over the next few weeks, Nathan and I began sharing more small moments of connection. We cooked dinner together instead of eating in silence, watched a new TV series, and even started a puzzle on the coffee table. They weren't grand gestures, but they reminded me of the partnership we'd built over the years. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were deeper issues we hadn't addressed, things that couldn't be fixed with date nights or movie marathons. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I decided to lay everything out. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I began. "And I feel like we're making progress, but there's still something missing." Nathan set down his drink, his expression serious. "I know what you mean," he said. "I've been so focused on work that I haven't been fully present." "That's not fair to you." "It's not just about work," I said gently. "It's about us being honest with each other, about what we need and what we're feeling." Nathan nodded. "You're right. I haven't been as open as I should be. I think I've been scared of failing." Hearing him admit that felt like a breakthrough. As Nathan and I worked on our relationship, I also began focusing on building a social life in the city. Maya introduced me to a few of her friends, and soon, I found myself part of a small but welcoming group. We started meeting for weekly trivia nights, and I discovered a side of myself I hadn't tapped into in years: competitive, playful, and full of laughter. For the first time, the city didn't feel so lonely. Nathan surprised me one Friday evening with an idea: "How about we take that weekend trip you mentioned?" His suggestion caught me off guard, but I eagerly agreed. We spent 2 days in a cabin by the lake, hiking, kayaking, and talking late into the night. It was the most connected I'd felt to him in months, and it reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place. Despite the progress we'd made, there were still moments of tension. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Nathan snapped at me for asking about dinner plans. "I can't think about that right now," he said, his tone sharper than usual. Instead of brushing it off, I responded calmly. "Nathan, I understand you're stressed, but I need to feel like we're a team. I can't keep doing this alone." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry." "You're right. I'm trying, but I know it's not enough." His acknowledgement felt like a step forward, even if it was a small one. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but we were learning to navigate the challenges together. Nathan started setting boundaries at work, coming home earlier and leaving his laptop closed during dinner. I continued exploring my interests, finding joy in photography and my growing circle of friends. There were still tough days, but there were also good ones, days when we laughed, connected, and remembered why we'd chosen each other in the first place. I realized that love wasn't just about the good times, it was about choosing each other even when things weren't easy. As the weeks went by, I started noticing a pattern in our relationship. For every moment of progress, there seemed to be another moment of retreat. Nathan would make an effort, planning a surprise dinner, asking about my photography class, but then fall back into his workaholic tendencies, leaving me feeling like I was always chasing stability. It wasn't intentional, I knew that. But it was exhausting. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Nathan broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. "What about?" I asked, setting my book aside. "About us being a team," he said. "You're right, I haven't been pulling my weight. I've been scared." His admission caught me off guard. "Scared of what?" "Scared of failing," he said, looking down at his hands. "At work, in our relationship, at everything. It feels like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough." Hearing him say that made something click for me. Nathan wasn't distant because he didn't care, he was distant because he cared too much. Nathan's confession opened the door to a deeper conversation. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "I didn't want to burden you," he admitted. "I thought I was protecting you by keeping it to myself." "You don't have to protect me from how you're feeling," I said gently. "That's what being a team means, sharing the load." From that moment on, we agreed to prioritize communication, even when it was uncomfortable. Nathan's struggles with work-life balance were a big part of our challenges, so we decided to tackle them head-on. He started setting boundaries at work, declining late-night emails and delegating tasks where he could. It wasn't easy for him, he'd built his career on being the person who always said yes. But as he made these changes, I noticed a shift in his energy. He seemed lighter, more present, and more engaged. At Maya's suggestion, Nathan and I attended a weekend couples workshop. The idea felt intimidating at first, but the experience was eye-opening. Through guided exercises, we learned to articulate our needs and listen without judgment. One activity involved writing letters to each other, expressing things we'd been afraid to say out loud. Nathan's letter brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry for shutting you out. I've been so focused on being enough that I forgot to show you how much you mean to me. I want to do better." In my letter, I shared my fears about losing the connection that had brought us together in the first place. Reading each other's words reminded us of the love that was still there, even beneath the challenges. While Nathan worked on himself, I continued focusing on my own growth. My photography class turned into a passion project. I started taking portraits of strangers in the city, capturing their stories through my lens. One of my photos even won a small contest, and the recognition gave me a confidence boost I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for Nathan to complete me. I was building a life that felt fulfilling on its own. The changes in our relationship weren't just external, they were emotional, too. Nathan began opening up to me in ways he never had before, sharing stories about his childhood, his insecurities, and his dreams for the future. One night, as we lay in bed, he said, "I don't think I've ever been this honest with anyone before." "Me neither," I admitted. "But it feels good, doesn't it?" "It does," he said, pulling me closer. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly connected. Despite our progress, there were still moments of fear that the changes wouldn't stick, that we'd fall back into old habits, or that we'd outgrow each other entirely. One evening, I voiced those fears to Nathan. "What if we can't keep this up?" I asked. Nathan took my hand. "Change is scary," he said. "But I think we're stronger now because we're facing it together." His reassurance calmed me, but I knew the real test would be time. To solidify the new foundation we were building, Nathan and I started creating traditions that felt uniquely ours. Every Sunday, we cooked a new recipe together, laughing at our kitchen mishaps. We made it a point to explore one new part of the city each month, turning our surroundings into shared memories. These small rituals reminded us of the joy in simply being together. The biggest test of our progress came when Nathan was offered a promotion at work. The new role would come with more responsibilities, and more stress. When he told me about the offer, I could see the conflict in his eyes. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think you need to ask yourself what matters most," I said. "This job, or the life we're building together?" After days of deliberation, Nathan turned down the promotion, choosing to prioritize our relationship and his mental health. His decision wasn't easy, but it showed me how much he'd grown. As the months passed, Nathan and I found a new rhythm, one that felt more balanced and intentional. We weren't perfect, and we didn't have all the answers. But we'd learned to communicate, to support each other, and to embrace the changes that came with building a life together. The first crisp days of autumn brought a sense of renewal. Nathan and I were no longer just coexisting, we were building something tangible together. Our days were marked by small rituals that reminded me how far we'd come. Morning coffee together, uninterrupted by work emails. Evening walks through the park, talking about our day without the weight of past tensions. "Feels like we're finally getting it right," Nathan said one evening as we strolled hand in hand. "It does," I replied, squeezing his fingers gently. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. What surprised me most about our progress wasn't the big moments, but the joy we found in the everyday. We laughed more, at silly inside jokes, at the messes we made trying new recipes, and at the stories we shared from our growing circle of friends. Life didn't feel perfect, but it felt real, and that was enough. One weekend, Nathan suggested we go through an old box of keepsakes he'd brought from his parents' house. Inside, we found movie tickets from our first date, a handwritten letter I'd sent him during our long-distance years, and a silly photo booth strip we'd taken at a carnival. "This was one of the best nights of my life," Nathan said, holding up the photo strip. "Mine too," I said, smiling. Looking back on those memories reminded us of the foundation we'd built, one strong enough to weather the challenges we'd faced. While Nathan and I grew closer, I continued to thrive in my own pursuits. My photography project turned into a small business, with clients hiring me for portraits and events. I even had a few of my pieces featured in a local gallery, an accomplishment that filled me with pride. "You've always had such an eye for beauty," Nathan said, admiring one of my prints. "Thanks," I said, feeling a warmth that came from knowing he genuinely supported me. Our relationship became less about keeping score and more about mutual support. When Nathan had a stressful week at work, I surprised him with his favorite dinner and a low-key movie night. When I had a big photography shoot, he made sure I had everything I needed, even helping me set up equipment. We weren't perfect, but we were trying, and that made all the difference. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset, Nathan turned to me and said, "I don't think I've ever felt this balance before." "Me neither," I admitted. "It's not always easy, but it's worth it." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I think the hardest part was realizing that change doesn't mean failure. It just means growth." His words stayed with me, a reminder of how far we'd both come. The true test of our progress came when I faced a major setback. A client canceled a big shoot last minute, leaving me frustrated and doubting myself. "I don't know why I even bother," I said, throwing my camera bag onto the couch. Nathan sat beside me, his tone gentle but firm. "Because you're passionate about this. One cancelled shoot doesn't erase all the success you've had." His words, and the steady way he said them, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this journey. With the progress we'd made, Nathan and I began talking about our future more openly. "We've come a long way," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "I feel like we're ready to start thinking about the next steps." "What do you mean by next steps?" I asked, my heart racing slightly. "I mean building a life that's truly ours," he said. "Whether that's traveling more, buying a house, or just continuing to grow together." The thought of a shared future filled me with excitement and peace. 1 year after my move, Nathan and I hosted a small dinner party to celebrate our journey. Maya, Rachel, and a few of our new friends joined us, filling our apartment with laughter and warmth. As I looked around the room, I realized how much had changed. The city no longer felt foreign, it felt like home. And Nathan no longer felt like someone I had to fight for, he felt like my partner again. "This is just the beginning," Nathan said as we clinked glasses. I smiled, knowing he was right. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. Together, we were building something new, one step at a time.